Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron Cowan. Welcome to the Cameron Journal Newshour. Let me change my graphics quickly back to what they need to be. And welcome, everyone. It's been a long week, a long day. I got a lot done today. Earlier today, I spoke with Matt Whitten, who is a really great TV writer. His new book, 51%, which is currently piloting at NBC, will be out soon. And we talked about writing process, writing for TV. He's written for some shows that a couple of my friends were into, so they all had questions about things and plot points and whatever have you, that I also got into with him. So it was great. We had a really fun time, and he was just really fun to hang out with. And that was started. I had a recording at noon. I usually record in the afternoon because it gives me time to get up and get ready and get dressed. And oh, I have a red spot on my chest. All this type of thing. And I woke up late today, and so I was barely together for him. But we had a great time, and so it's been a busy day and week in the news. We have a lot of things to cover, although not quite as crazy as last week. Last week we had so much in the show, it was like an hour and a half. Tonight we'll come in right on time at about an hour. But I want to remind everyone to follow me on social media. If you want the Cameron Journal delivered to your inbox, there are two ways to do that. You can go to CameronJournal.com/newsletter and sign up there. You can also go to CameronJournal.substack.com and get the newsletter delivered to your inbox every Saturday. And I am launching ad-free for paying members of Substack or Cameron Journal Plus subscribers. So, if you want to contribute to the journalism, this weekend I covered the death of Robert Mueller, several different stories, Iran. I do deep dives, and you get the interviews from the week, the news hour, the living joke, all delivered right to your inbox. So if you want to support me, support my journalism, CameronJournal.substack.com, which is really great. And then obviously you can catch me on social media. All my links are at CameronJournal.com or also on my Substack, which is really great. We have a lot of great interviews coming up. I did 5 recordings last week. I have 3 this week. We have April's going to be really great for the podcast. So stick around. If you're watching me on YouTube, Twitch, whatever have you, make sure to like and subscribe. I never ask people that, but I should do more. Like and subscribe on whatever platform you're watching on. If we're live on Facebook, we're live on Twitch, we're live on YouTube. Make sure to like and subscribe, and that will be fantastic. So let's dive into the headlines, and we're going to start with something that isn't insignificant but is a note if you've been paying attention to politics over the last 10 years. Robert Mueller, the special prosecutor who investigated the Trump campaign ties to Russia, wrong graphic, there we go, died over the weekend. He was suffering from Parkinson's. This is the Reuters story. It says here, Robert S. Mueller III, the FBI director who transformed the nation's premier law enforcement agency into a terrorism fighting force after the September 11, 2001 attacks, and who later became special counsel in charge of investigating ties between Russia and Donald Trump's presidential campaign, has died. He was 81. Quote, with deep sadness, we are sharing the news that Bob passed away on Friday night, his family said in a statement Saturday. His family asked that their privacy be respected. At the FBI, Mueller set about almost immediately overhauling the Bureau's mission to meet the law enforcement needs of the 21st century, beginning his 12-year tenure just 1 week before the September 11th attacks and serving across presidents of both political parties. The cataclysmic event instantaneously switched the Bureau's top priority from solving domestic crime to preventing terrorism. A shift that imposed an almost impossibly difficult standard on Mueller and the rest of the federal government. Preventing 99 out of 100 terrorist plots wasn't good enough. Later, he was special counsel in the Justice Department's investigation into whether the Trump campaign illegally coordinated with Russia to sway the outcome of the 2016 presidential race. His investigation concluded that Russia interfered in the election on Trump's behalf and that the Trump campaign welcomed the help, but Mueller and his team ultimately found insufficient evidence of a criminal conspiracy and did not make a prosecutorial decision about whether Trump had obstructed justice. Mueller was maligned throughout the 2-year investigation by Trump, who regularly derided it as a witch hunt, but the patrician Princeton graduate and Vietnam vet who walked away from a lucrative mid-career job to stay in public service remained silent throughout the criticism, exhibiting an old-school, button-down style that made him an anachronism during a social media-saturated era. Trump posted on social media after the announcement of Mueller's death, "Robert Mueller has just died. Good, I'm glad he's dead." The Republican president added, "He can no longer hurt innocent people." So, yes. And then it goes into Bush appointing him and the Bush years. Yes, 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 yes. And the relentless commitment to the rule of law from Obama, all this type of thing. And his history as an FBI director and his whole thing. It was it was kind of funny because no one really knew who he was. He wasn't really out there like that before he was brought in to investigate that particular aspect of the Trump campaign in the 2016 election. And I had forgotten he was FBI director during the Bush years. I don't think he was not out in public like that during the Bush years, so I think we kind of sort of forgotten about him. And then all of a sudden he bursts onto the scene, and there's a very famous podcast called Mueller, She Wrote, that was launched during the Mueller investigation and made him a household name. Which, what a thing to become a household name for. But it's, it's always of note when great men pass on, and they don't make them like Robert Mueller anymore. I appreciated his old school style and all this sort of thing. They don't make them like that anymore. Our age is not kind to that anymore. And I share many of those traits, and I can definitely tell you our age is not kind to that. This show would be much more popular if I were more outrageous, like my colleagues Asmongold and all these guys who are constantly shouting and shouting and shouting. I take after Walter Cronkite, and, well, Walter Cronkite's been dead for 30 years. So, moving right along. This week, 13 airports are welcoming new ICE agents to take over some of the duties of the TSA due to a partial funding shutdown at Homeland Security. Now, before we get into the story, let me set the scene. Not all of the federal government is funded at once. When they pass the budget's actually a set of about 13 pieces of different legislation passed at different times of the year. There's mandatory spending, there's discretionary spending, all this type of thing. The discretionary portion of the DHS budget is up for review, and Democrats are not wanting to let anything go through until they get either funding pulled from ICE or major concessions on what ICE does. Republicans are not interested in doing any of those reforms, or very few of them, and certainly are not interested in defunding ICE, which some Democrats would like to do. And so there's a deadlock in Congress right now where the Department of Homeland Security funding is held up in arguments and negotiations over ICE funding. Unfortunately, the TSA and America's airports, who are funded by these bills, are caught in the crosshairs. Lines are out the door in Atlanta, all this type of thing. So, what President Trump has done is he is sending ICE agents into U.S. airports to help solve the problem. It says here that ICE agents are now patrolling U.S. airports. Here's what to know. The deployment comes as a battle over Department of Homeland Security funding has led to closed security checkpoints, long lines, and missed flights. Up to 150 Immigrations and Customs Enforcement officers were deployed at airports across the United States on Monday, a move that the Trump administration said was an effort to address long lines amid a shortage of Transportation Security Administration agents who are working without pay during the partial government shutdown. ICE officers' exact duties at airports remained unclear. Officers were seen on Monday at several airports walking in small groups through check-in areas and standing near exits, their faces mostly unmasked. Unlike TSA agents, ICE personnel are being paid. Democratic lawmakers and the union representing TSA officers denounced the deployment of ICE to airports as disruptive, unsafe, and unhelpful. Here's what travelers need to know. The Department of Homeland Security said in a statement on Sunday that ICE would help bolster TSA efforts to keep our skies safe and minimize air travel disruptions. The shortage of TSA personnel stems from the ongoing partial government shutdown. Nearly 50,000 TSA officers have been working without pay since February 14th, when funding for the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees the TSA, lapsed amid a congressional standoff over immigration enforcement. Many TSA officers have taken on second jobs to pay their bills, sometimes calling out of work to do so, and more than 400 officers have quit since the shutdown began. DHS said on Monday nearly 12% of TSA officers called out of work Sunday, the highest rate so far during the shutdown. That includes about 42% of officers at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport and Louis Armstrong New Orleans International Airport, and more than 37% at Kennedy Airport in New York. The shortage has led to long security lines that have sneaked out of terminals, causing some travelers to miss flights. The administration has said that using ICE agents to perform non-screening roles like guarding exits would allow the TSA to focus on staffing security checkpoints. Critics of the ICE deployment will argue it will not alleviate security lines and is instead intended to pressure Democrats to pass funding for DHS without the changes to immigration enforcement they have called for. Looks like they're going to Hartsfield-Jackson, Chicago, LaGuardia, JFK, Newark, and follow facilities like the William H. Hobby Airport in Houston. So far, ICE officers have been seen walking through airports and observing but not actively assisting with passenger screening. In an interview on Sunday with CNN, Tom Homan, President Trump's chief border official, suggested that ICE agents would play a limited role in security operations. I don't see an ICE agent looking at an x-ray machine because they're not trained in that, he said, but an ICE agent might cover an exit, allowing TSA officers to focus on screening. But also on Sunday, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy told ABC News that ICE agents could take a more active approach. They know how to pat people down, he said. They know how to run the x-ray machines. Aaron Barker, the president of the TSA Employees Union in Georgia, pushed back on that assertion, saying that ICE agents can't do what a TSA officer is doing with screening passengers. They don't have the training for that. ICE and TSA are both part of the Department of Homeland Security, but the shutdown does not affect ICE officers' pay because Congress funded immigration enforcement last year. And then it goes into how travelers are being affected. Mr. Trump said on Monday that he would send the National Guard to assist at airports if ICE agents were unable to ease delays. He also said that Republicans should stop negotiating with Democrats to end the partial government shutdown. So, there was a video about a woman who was pushed down and taken away in an airport. Interestingly enough, but I did not. I didn't find out if that was AI. I just thought it was interesting that it was kind of already going around. So either something happened or people are already making stuff up. Welcome to 2026. Here's what we do know. So that's yes. So this is a new and interesting tactic. I suppose, they could be also helping in, I guess it kind of makes sense in terms of the guarding of the exits and freeing up the TSA to open more checkpoints and all this type of thing. But it is interesting that there doesn't seem to be any real plan, given Tom Homan's like, no, they won't be doing that. And Sean Duffy's like, yeah, they could. Left hand, right hand doesn't know what doing. So if you're hearing about this is kind of the situation. This will probably drag on as long as the partial shutdown goes on, which who knows, given that it involves ICE and ICE tactics on immigration enforcement. So, and this operation could continue to expand. And yeah, could include National Guard and all sorts of things, which creates a very interesting travel experience with people in uniform. So, moving right along, I found this article on The Conversation by Matthew Burkholder, and from the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, which is an organization I've written about and with quite often. And I wanted to get into this Christian nationalist thing because I covered this on Saturday on the newsletter, and I wanted to and I was imploring people, like, we have to protest now. We have to start asking Congress people now. We have to take action now, because this evangelical holy war situation is coming to a head. And I know that doesn't make a lot of sense to people, but for those of us that grew up in it and grew up on the Left Behind books and listening to all of this stuff, this is here and it's now. The great thing about the Iran situation, and we'll get into it in a little bit, is that people are seeing the Iran war for what it is. There's an Israel component to it that is quite significant, and people are seeing that. People are saying that. The idea of Greater Israel, which is from the Nile in Egypt to the Euphrates, is being talked about openly. MRFF has never gotten more press and more acclaim than this moment, because the lid is off the pot and the pasta is boiling everywhere. So, I wanted to cover this again on the News Hour because this is very important. If you, and I'll just say this right out, and I don't usually talk about the news this way. If you are watching this right now and you would like to continue to live in a secular, pluralistic society where you can choose what to worship or not, where you can choose what you want to wear or not, and all that sort of the freedoms that we're ordinarily enjoying, and you don't want to be stuck looking like a Christian homeschool kid, if that has any appeal to you whatsoever, this should be of paramount concern. This Christian nationalism has been cropping up in its current format for at least 20 years, and the roots go deeper and farther back. If you want to get into all of it, my article at the Cameron Journal, CameronJournal.com, goes into the complete history going back to the 1850s. But the latest incarnation kind of starts in the 60s with Billy Graham and Pat Robertson and the 700 Club and all that stuff. This is reaching a fever pitch. This is reaching ahead. And so I want to get into this article a little bit and talk about this more, because this is the future of our country. And I don't mean that in a hand-wavy Democrat, I'm trying to get you to vote for a candidate way. I mean, literally, if you want to continue living the way we have been in some form, get worried. So, soldiers in the United States Armed Forces have lodged more than 100 complaints with the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, MRFF, stating that their commanders are using extremist religious rhetoric to describe the U.S.-Israel war against Iran. According to some complaints, American military commanders have told their troops the attack on Iran is a holy war, and that U.S. President Donald Trump was anointed by Jesus to light the signal fire in Iran to cause Armageddon and mark his return to Earth. In a recent interview with Democracy Now!, the MRFF's president, Mikey Weinstein, said the foundation was inundated with calls from soldiers indicating that commanders across the armed forces were euphoric because the war would serve as a way to, quote, bring their version of weaponized Jesus back, unquote. The comments are among other violent religious rhetoric to come from U.S. officials. The U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, father of Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, caused a diplomatic row when he suggested Israel had a biblical claim to take over much of the Middle East. The language also comes from some American officials. Some American officials have sought to characterize the Iranian government as fanatical. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Iran was run by religious fanatic lunatics. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said crazy regimes like Iran, hell-bent on prophetic Islamic delusions, could not have nuclear weapons. Meanwhile, American televangelist John Hagee recently claimed that Russia, Turkey, what's left of Iran, and groups of Islamics would soon invade Israel and be destroyed by God. And then he gets into his PhD and everything, and here's where it gets interesting. Rhetoric about war as being religious and Trump being divinely anointed and about to cause Armageddon is deeply disturbing and has catalyzed condemnation from Christians in the U.S. and beyond, advocating nonviolent and diplomatic foreign policy. Violent U.S. religious rhetoric being amplified with the U.S.-Israel war against Iran is associated with beliefs that once Israel is restored as a nation and the temple in Jerusalem is rebuilt, Jesus will return and judge humanity. Christians adhering to these views read the biblical book of Revelation, with its vivid symbolic apocalyptic language, as making literal claims about history. They maintain their inspired and authoritative biblical interpretation allows them to know conflicts in the Middle East and initiate God's final act in history, with Trump seen as the dominating and aggressive man who can help usher in God's violent judgment of his enemies. It's relevant to consider how some Christian beliefs about Jesus' death correlate with a willingness to support or justify violence. Protestant evangelical theologians such as J.I. Packer and John Stott, argue that Jesus' death primarily paid the penalty for human sin. They emphasize that God's holiness requires a payment for this sin. In this framework, God orchestrates the violent death of Jesus to satisfy God's penal justice to forgive humanity. This is what I grew up with, folks. Non-evangelical Christians, on the other hand, like 19th century Congregationalist Horace Bushnell and contemporary Mennonite theologian J. Denny Weaver, understand the death of Jesus as an example of God's love. In this interpretation, Jesus doesn't endure violence to pay a debt to God. Instead, the death of Jesus is more akin to that of a martyr's tragic death. These theologians reject violence as a condition for forgiveness. A 2012 debate in the Presbyterian Church about a hymn demonstrates this tension with a proposed change of hymn lyrics from "On that cross as Jesus died, the wrath of God was satisfied" to "the love of God was magnified." Ultimately, the authors rejected the proposal, but the conflict demonstrates that Christians are passionate about their different interpretations of Jesus' death. And then it gets into a lot more Bible stuff that we're not going to read right now. The point being is this all comes out of a very specific brand of white evangelicalism, mostly Baptist, Southern Baptist sort of flavors. And there's enough of these people who have enough power in the GOP and all this type of thing that they've been leveraging the military for 20 years. And again, I have a long article about this in partnership with MRFF about this. For 20 years, Mikey Weinstein's been fighting this since 2004. So 22 years. And this, I've always said Trump has been a moderating force on the GOP in terms of he's not really sold on all of this stuff, and so he doesn't always engage in it. However, this war in Iran is right out of the book of Revelation. It's right out of the Left Behind books. There are pastors, I guarantee you, walk into any Baptist church in the South, and you will have pastors saying, this is it. It's time for Armageddon. That's why they're doing this, all this sort of thing. Now, the reality is it's a land grab for Israel, and we're trying to get rid of Iran and all this sort of thing. That's the reality is, when we'll get into more of that, there's the reality of it, but that's the narrative. And these are also people who believe that our entire country should live by them, by their values, in the way that they do, and that our country would be better if it were based in Christian values and the Bible were equal to the Constitution. So if that doesn't have any appeal to you, and I imagine if you watch this show on any regular basis it doesn't, this is something we need to start speaking out more loudly about. This has now caused a war, and the minute Trump is gone in 2028, I guarantee you the GOP will run, not walk, to make this basically their official position. Get scared. Because this is the real deal. It's ironic that we're trying to destroy a theocracy while they also would like a theocracy. You can't, if you pitched a book of that to publishers, they would reject it for being implausible. That's the life we're leading right now. It's nuts. This is nuts. But that's where we are. And I was very forceful in my newsletter. I encourage people to donate to MRFF. They are fighting the good fight to fight for the religious rights of our fighting men and women, and they are at the front lines of this conversation, and it's global right now. They've never gotten this level of attention. They've been on CNN. This conversation is blowing up. Get scared. Get busy. Start shouting it out. Share this video. Explore the Military Religious Freedom Foundation page, all this sort of thing. I'll put some links in the description that will help. I'll save this. Instead of getting rid of it, I'll pin it. I'll share this. Please let people know this is what we're facing. And this will not stop with Iran. It gets so much worse. All right. Speaking of Iran, let's get into Iran. I forgot to change my graphic. God damn it. All right. Let's get into Iran. It's sometimes hard to do graphics and do the show at the same time. Anyway. So, let's think about how the war in Iran is going. Hint, hint. Not good. All right. So, I was reading some things this morning, and this was a report from the Institute for the Study of War. And there's been some interesting things that have happened. So, Iran fired 2 ballistic missiles at the Diego Garcia Air Base, which is a U.S.-UK joint base in the Indian Ocean, right there. That's the longest missile attempt they've ever made. One missile failed in flight. They intercepted the other. Obviously, Iran did it as a point to show that they had reach if they wanted to. These show that if Iran can fire something that far, here's everywhere they could hit. Which, for those of you who may have not paid attention in geography, is most of Western Europe, except for Ireland, the Hebrides, Portugal, and most of Spain. their missile can reliably hit everything in this inner circle and could possibly hit everything as far as Thailand, Delhi, all of North Africa, most of North Africa rather, all of Western Europe, up into Scandinavia, London, and most of Western Russia. And so it is definitely, I think, changing the calculus for the involvement in a lot of things. Again, one of the missiles failed in flight, but if they wanted to make a gambit for attacking something else, something bigger, something NATO related, Iran's showing they could do it. And that, in terms of conflict escalation, this gets a lot bigger. Um, it also says here that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, has reportedly expanded its influence over regime decision making in a growing power vacuum caused by leadership losses and Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khomeini's apparent inability to exercise full authority. Some of the officials who have likely expanded their influence are among the most aggressive and repressive elements within the IRGC. The United States Treasury Department issued a short-term waiver on March 20th permitting the sale of Iranian oil already in transit. The waiver does not allow for the purchase of new oil. The combined force continued to degrade Iran's missile production capabilities. The IDF struck at least 5 missile production sites in Tehran. So it's yeah. So that is kind of what's happening here. There is strikes on industrial sites throughout. Here's the Strait of Hormuz that's closed unless you're paying in yuan. There's also a rumor that Iran wants to now have a toll that would bring them in 800 billion a year. So there's these various and sundry sites, including these launchers and all this sort of thing. I've read so many rumors of stuff. I'm not even going to pass everything along, but we'll get into it. The United States also struck the Natanz nuclear facility in Estefan province on March 21st. Anti-regime media stated that the United States used a bunker buster bomb. Armed Forces General Staff affiliated media stated on March 21st that no nuclear material had leaked after the strikes. The combined force previously struck the Natanz nuclear facility on March 2nd and during the 12-day war. The Associated Press, citing an unreleased IAEA report, reported on February 27th that the IAEA had observed activity at Natanz and the Fordo fuel enrichment plant, but could not verify the purpose or nature of the activity. And, oh yes, and then these are strikes from last week in and around Tehran and elsewhere. So that is, and there's still a lot of missiles going into Israel, a lot of people living in bunkers. It's still quite dire, for life in Israel right now. So, and there's still a lot of talk about missiles and drones and we'll talk more about this, but I thought this was interesting from this morning and had some great maps for us to look at, which is always great. I loved this analysis from Arta Moeni. He's over at Diplomatic Peace. He's a PhD at Georgetown. I actually need to be following him. And it's and I thought it was interesting. Stepping off the escalation trap is highly unlikely. Now, remember what I said about escalation, that the more Iran expands its reach and the more it does, the more people are drawn in to fight against it. And, well, here, listen to Mr. Arta tell us more about it. The war's root causes remain unaddressed. Iran has no guarantees it won't be attacked in a few months. It must consolidate its strategic gains. It cannot risk another 12-day war, mow the lawn scenario of short-term high-intensity bombing. To stabilize the Middle East, Washington must finally recognize Iran as a regional hegemon, a middle power akin to Turkey or Russia, with inalienable sovereign rights it can credibly defend. This means accepting Iranian missile capacity, domestic enrichment, and its de facto control over the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. must also abandon its obsolete Mideast paradigm, acknowledge the shifting reality on the ground, and retire the disastrous Carter Doctrine and its unsustainable gunboat diplomacy. Instead, it must accept the role of regional pillars, embracing the natural equilibrium derived from regional power politics and local balancing. This would render U.S. policing redundant. Currently, however, there is zero evidence Trump will do this. The U.S. could use its third Persian Gulf War as a historic watershed to exit the Persian Gulf and the wider West Asia and force its regional satellites like Israel and the GCC to reconcile with the actual balance of power in the Middle East. Instead, Washington will likely use any tactical pause to regroup for further bullying and coercion down the road. Tehran is not blind to this. While the U.S.-Israeli approach of shock and awe seeks immediate capitulation, Iran's strategy of asymmetric attrition aims for a slow, painful realization. The U.S. is running out of time with no moves left, nor does it hold any trump cards. As such, Iran seeks a comprehensive, permanent, non-aggression pact on its own terms. It will not hand Trump a face-saving ceasefire while he is cornered. And it mentions a video about President Trump saying we're going to have a ceasefire on hostilities from the United States until Friday. So that also was a bit of news that this happened all day. I mean, there was new news and rumors out all day at different times, different things, and President Trump announced the cessation of hostilities for 5 days until now. And the Iranian state television is saying the Americans are backing down due to the resilience of the armed forces and the Iranian people. So there's definitely, there needs to be an end game here. I don't know what the end game is, but there needs to be an end game here, and it doesn't appear that there is one. The other kind of interesting thing is Donald Trump just said, this was this morning, said the Strait of Hormuz will be jointly controlled and may be controlled by me and the Ayatollah. The same man who 36 hours ago threatened to obliterate Iranian power plants now proposes co-managing the world's most important oil choke point with the leader of the country he's bombing. In the same breath, Trump said it is not the supreme leader. Nobody has heard from him, and we don't know if he's living. He's proposing to jointly control the strait with a man he simultaneously says may be dead. While Trump was saying this, the IDF confirmed it had just completed a wide-scale wave of strikes on Tehran using over 100 munitions. Targets included Quds Force Command Post, an IRGC Aerial Defense Headquarters, an IRGC Ground Forces Headquarters, and a large military compound in the heart of Tehran. The Quds Force Intelligence Headquarters, a Ministry of Defense Naval Cruise Missile Manufacturing site, and multiple ballistic missile warhead and electronics research facilities. The IDF reports it has destroyed approximately 330 of Iran's estimated 470 ballistic missile launchers. Iranian fire has collapsed from 90 missiles per day on day 1 to approximately 10. The IAF is now hunting the remaining 140. While Trump was saying this, Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson stated for the third time today that there have been no direct or indirect talks with Washington, and that Iran's position on the Strait of Hormuz has not changed in any way. While Trump was saying this, Iran delivered the sentence that should be read by every head of state on earth. You struck our hospitals, we did not do the same. You struck our emergency centers, we did not do the same. You struck our schools, we did not do the same. But if you strike electricity, we will strike electricity. That is not a threat. That is a ledger. Iran is publicly recording what it has not done to establish the legal and moral basis for what it will do. The ledger says we absorbed hospitals, we absorbed schools, we absorbed emergency centers. Electricity is on the line, cross it, and the regional grid becomes a battlefield. Every desalination plant, every hospital ventilator, every water treatment system in the Gulf that runs on power. Trump then claimed Iran agreed to hand over nuclear dust. He said, we've agreed to that. Iran has agreed to nothing publicly. Trump has negotiated in public with a counterparty that says it's not at the table, proposing to share a strait with a leader whose existence he questions, claiming a nuclear deal that the other side has not acknowledged, while his Air Force drops 100 munitions on the capital of the country he says he's dealing with. Rosatom is evacuating Bushehr nuclear plant to a skeleton crew. The 5-day clock is ticking. The 140 remaining launchers are being hunted. The strait is closed. And the man who controls the world's largest military just proposed co-managing the world's most important waterway with a man who may not be alive to sign the agreement. The molecules do not negotiate with ghosts. The molecules wait. And then there's a video of Trump talking about all of this. We'll watch a little bit.
Either for medical purposes, civilian purposes?
They have. Thank you.
What about the Strait of Hormuz? Who's going to be in control of that?
That'll be opened very soon if this works.
How soon? And who's in control of it? Will Iran still be able to control the flow of oil?
Be jointly controlled.
By whom?
Maybe me. Maybe me.
You want the United States to be in
Me
control
and the Ayatollah, whoever the Ayatollah is, whoever the next Ayatollah. Look, and there'll also be a form of a very serious form of a regime change. Now, in all fairness, everybody's been killed from the regime.
Either for medical purposes, civilian purposes?
They have.
So it keeps going on. I think Trump is just throwing out ideas to see what sticks at this point, which is what he does. But that's what's going on. There's only one problem: people are dying. Oh, this was interesting. There was a drone a drone attack a penetration of airspace at Barksdale Air Force Base. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it says here that given the 5 days of repeated intrusions, there's a higher probability that these drones were launched from a remote area. Operators would need to alternate between multiple launch and landing points to avoid detection. A fixed-wing style drone with a hybrid motor operating on liquid fuel and battery is a likely contender. This would place the wingspan of about 4 to 5 meters. The advanced cameras are for guidance and terrain analysis, and a total 6-hour flight time. That would easily drive the cost of each drone to $60,000. And it would need 50 meters of runway space. And it's kind of showing how around like where they suspect it came from and where Barksdale's is and these repeated drone intrusions. There's a swarm of 12 to 15 drones penetrated the airspace for 5 consecutive days. They halted flight operations and on one occasion forced a shelter-in-place order. I don't know why they didn't begin shooting at them. And apparently it came from the southeast here. Bases here came from down here. I don't know any more about that, but it was very I found it interesting that this was a thing. And could be a sleeper cell or other asymmetric actor. This was very interesting. So this came from the New York Times this morning, as reported by Max Blumenthal over at Gray Zone News. Says here, New York Times has essentially confirmed that Israel played a role in stimulating the violent regime change riots that left around 3,000 dead in Iran this January 8th and 9th, but which were marketed in the West as pro-democracy protests. It was well understood by the Mossad that these riots would help stimulate military action by Trump. Israeli intel merely needed to convince the feeble-minded president that a wave of decapitation strikes would unleash a massive upheaval to immediately topple the Islamic Republic. The January riots were presented to Trump as a preview of what was to come. Western media, including the New York Times and The Guardian, played a central role in legitimizing Israel's deception by falsely characterizing the violent regime change riots as mere protests, massively inflating the death toll and covering up the fact that many were murdered by the Israel-backed rioters themselves. The whole of Western media and the Western human rights industrial complex deliberately misrepresented the real character of these riots. But now the war they helped to instigate is going badly for the U.S. and Israel, and that same media is now free to reveal a few kernels of truth. And it says here that Mossad's strategy during that period was to try to weaken the government until it essentially surrendered to Israeli and American demands, using a combination of crippling economic sanctions and operations to assassinate Iranian nuclear scientists and military leaders and sabotage nuclear facilities. Over the past year, as the prospect of Israeli military action against Iran became more likely, Mr. Barnes reversed Mossad's approach, devoting the agency's resources to plans that could lead to toppling the government in Tehran in the event of a war. In recent months, according to officials, Mr. Barnier came to believe that Mossad could potentially begin igniting riots around Iran after several days of intense Israeli and American airstrikes and the assassination of senior Iranian leaders. Yeah, I mean, we kind of went into all this knowing that the hope was, oh, there's protests, okay, we'll see if we can topple the regimes, and that's not what happened at all, sort of thing, although there is definitely some misarray, but this isn't really a surprise, so I'm not quite sure why he's surprised, but again, we explore the news narratives. This is another interesting narrative, but the reality is 67% of people already think this is Israel's war, so this isn't new. We kind of knew this, but thank you, Max, for telling us. Oh, this guy, yes, so this Professor Jiang, I thought this was interesting. He thinks that the biggest problem with Iran is not what's going to happen to America, but what will happen to China. So this is an interesting perspective. It says the Iran war equals second Ukraine. The war will be long and exhausting. No side will admit defeat. America is stuck between two bad options. Withdrawal equals collapse of prestige, continuation, endless bleeding. My view, this is exactly what happened in Ukraine. Americans have no exit strategy, only an entry strategy. Why can't America exit? Iran will demand $1 trillion in compensation plus complete U.S. withdrawal from the region. If America withdraws, Gulf states will become clients of Iran. The petrodollar will collapse. America, with $39 trillion in debt, will face a real economic collapse. The point no one talks about, America is not fighting for Iran. It's fighting so it does not collapse itself. Iran's smart plan, $800 billion per year. Iran plans to impose a 10% passage fee on every ship crossing the Strait of Hormuz. Expected revenue of $800 billion per year. This amount will rebuild Iran stronger than before. If this is correct, and I see it is not so far-fetched, Iran will emerge from this war richer than it entered. But he says here, the biggest loser is not America, but China. China imports 40% of its energy from the Gulf. Its economy is entirely built on cheap energy. Even artificial intelligence, which everyone talks about, requires cheap energy. Any disruption in energy supplies will hit China more than any other country. And what no one notices, the war in Iran is not just an American war. It is a war on China's future as a great power. The real beneficiaries, Israel and Russia. Israel wants greater Israel from the Nile to the Euphrates. Draining America in a long war equals pushing out of the region. Weakening the Gulf equals removing any competitor. Russia. America lifted sanctions on Russian oil, which happened on Saturday. Russia sells oil at record prices and finances its war in Ukraine from America's pocket. In short, America's paying for others' wars while thinking it's winning. And then it gets into the religious factor, which we've talked about. And then it says the ground invasion is coming. There's already a rumor that they're going to seize Karg Island, which is Iran's oil facility. I think I have a story about that coming up. The UAE, it says also here the weakening of the UAE. Dubai was built on the illusion of security. Simple Iranian strikes revealed the model's fragility entirely. What was a safe haven became a target, and the confidence upon which all these towers were built is eroding. The UAE will not end, but its economic model will be severely shaken because everything is based on the assumption of regional security, and that assumption has collapsed. Japan will recover and China will decline. Professor Jing literally said, if I had $1 billion, I would put it all in Japan. Japan has historically risen from anything. The Mongols, World War II, nuclear bombs. China, however, agricultural, closed, and able to adapt to the new era. The West is collapsing from within. Europe, Canada, and Australia are experiencing deliberate demographic change. The democracy that emerges looks more like organized demolition of Western civilization. And the question, who is driving this? No one has a clear answer. I thought the only interesting part was that he thinks China is kind of the loser out of all this, which may explain why Beijing has taken a wait-and-see attitude. But I think, yes, we're now at the situation where the geopolitical chessboard is 110% being reset, more so than what Trump did last year. There's no guarantee China comes out on top of that, especially given their economy shrinking, which is a whole other story. And speaking of that, this is actually also quite good. And this is from John Podritz. And it says here that, and this is, speaking of what I just said about resetting the board. Iran will emerge as a regional hegemon of the Gulf and therefore as a great power in the international system. If the U.S. cannot seize the Hormuz weapon from Iranian hands, no one can. Deterrence in Asia is gone. If the U.S. cannot suppress Iranian missiles, there's no possibility of suppressing Chinese missiles in Asia. The multipolar world was a hypothesis at the end of February. It's now a confirmed military fact. The U.S. will have to revert to hemispheric defense. Maybe not. Hold that thought. I mean, that's where the Trump administration is going, but they will have to revert. I don't think that is true. This has large-scale implications for the world because it undermines functional specialization in the international system. It is very hard to see how the Gulf monarchs can survive this revolution in the balance of global power. A lot of equations are going to break because of the collapse of U.S. military impunity. On the bright side, a global stagflationary shock is coming. Only the velocity and violence of the shock are uncertain. They are both likely to be considerable. The oil, gas, and food price shock will destabilize inflation expectations and force the central banks to deliver global monetary tightening. Meanwhile, the deteriorating balance of payments and income replacement will stretch fiscal capacities. This will hit the weakest, hardest by definition. It seems very much like the warring nations will wreck the world economy that feeds us all. Everyone needs to prepare for the very serious and persistent shocks, especially if he delivers on his ultimatum. We're on the precipice here. It's the end of the American century. Things can get very hairy indeed. Reports of U.S. decline are sometimes greatly exaggerated, but when we're already seeing problems with helium, which is AI chip production, MRIs in hospitals, things like that. Most of that comes to the Middle East. It's not moving right now. Fertilizer, it's planting season. Fertilizer's not moving right now. It's getting expensive because there's so little of it elsewhere. We saw this during the Ukraine invasion. Food spikes. Oil prices going up. The price of gas is going to start to get expensive. We got to be in for the long haul on this one. Because even if everything stopped tomorrow, most of the Gulf is going to take 3 to 5 years to repair. We won't see full capacity again till the end of this decade and into the next one. And so, but this guy is saying that we're facing strategic defeat in Iran. And I think that is certainly possible. I'm not saying it isn't possible. But given the fact that a lot of the teeth has been taken out of the Iranian tiger, and it's very clear the leadership is trying to scramble, and the Republican Guard is trying to fight to the death, don't declare it over yet. Wars have a very bad habit of changing very quickly. The we kind of already talked about that. Oh yes, yeah. I mean, we're not going to go through this. He talks about the 6 things that broke this morning that caused the ceasefire. One is the bill. The Pentagon requested $200 billion and it might not pass. The Fed kept rates steady. Allies revolted politely because no one's really helping. They're running out of fuel in Taiwan, which will affect global chip production. There's tons of damage to oil infrastructure in the region, and then rising gas prices are bad for the election in the fall. And that all of this math is, causing Trump to want to do this pause. Some people are saying it's because there's going to be the ground invasion. We'll know when we know, sort of thing. So that's Iran. We're going to move on and talk about a couple things quickly before we close things out this evening, because I'm not going to do a huge whole thing this evening. I said we're going to be at an hour. That's 10 minutes. Let's see what we can get through. So, this post I thought was very interesting. The right is about immigration. The Civil Rights Act. No. Traditional values. The left is right about healthcare is a scam. Big corporations screw the public. Food and water supplies being poisoned. Wages suck. The libertarian right is right about the exploding national debt crisis. War in general is a racket. Distrust of FBI, CIA. The far right is right that Jews are destroying our country internally. We want no more Jewish wars. The far left is right that Jews are destroying Palestine and the Middle East through a humanitarian crisis. We want no more Jewish wars. You will essentially need a nationalist dictator to meld all the correct things together and save the country, which the current system cannot do by design. Most of this is not true. In terms of I wouldn't agree with it. On the face, all of these are good ideas. Well, saying that the Civil Rights Act should be gotten rid of is not a good idea. You're disenfranchising citizens in your own country. I wonder what part of immigration he thinks the right is right about, because I may or may disagree. Traditional values, no. Some of these other things are helpful, but the Jews are destroying our country internally is not true in the vast majority of cases. However, if you want to get a sense of who reads this sort of thing and what they think, I'm going to invite you to check out the first comment, which is at Grok, which historical leader best fits the description of addressing all of the above points, name only, and it names Adolf Hitler. Welcome to Elon's Twitter X thing. I don't know that we would want to live in a country where we harmonized all of these things. I mean, if you're a very particular person, I'm sure this has a great deal of appeal to you. But for a lot of us, it basically means some combination of disenfranchisement. Because here's the thing. If you get rid of the Civil Rights Act and you can openly disenfranchise people, fixing healthcare is not going to matter because people are going to be disenfranchised. Fixing the food and water is not going to matter because I'm not going to be able to afford it. The distrust of FBI, CIA, that's cool, but you're disenfranchising everybody. That's where this whole thing, again, there's some of these things was kind of like, okay, that would be cool. Traditional values. Okay, we're getting rid of no-fault divorce. Women can have a bank account or a credit card. All this type of, how again, and this is why this never happens, because nobody necessarily wants to go back to living that way, but they'd like the society that they thought produced that. And yes, we do need to do something about the national debt. War in general is a racket, especially if you're a shareholder of a major defense corporation. Yeah, we probably shouldn't trust the FBI, CIA very much, given their track record. I don't think we need to be anti-Semitic in this whole conversation. And yeah, we need universal health care. Yes, big corporations screw the public by lobbying for legislation that benefits them and no one else. Wages do so. Yeah, all that is all true. But when immigration depends. I might be with you on immigration. I might not be, depending on how he thinks that should be addressed. The idea of quote unquote no more Jewish wars. Sure, no more wars for Israel anyway. We need to defend ourselves and worry about our own problems. Yes, sure, okay. But this is the type of thinking that is. This is the type of thinking and the type of narrative that's so common in political discourse, especially online right now. And I don't think anybody really wants to live in a society where all of these things are harmonized. Because a lot of people get left out in the cold. For many people, that's a feature, not a bug. I'm going to come back to that in a second. Oh, this is the feel-good story. Let's do the feel-good story, shall we? So this one went viral this morning, and it's very cute. It's straight out of Homeward Bound. This is in China. These dogs were stolen from their owners in the dog meat trade. Illegal, but it still exists. And these 7 dogs escaped their captors, and they traveled 17 kilometers back to their home, led by a precocious corgi, if you can believe it. This was some video of the dog standing on the side of the road trying to get away, traveling as a pack in a group. So it was all very, very cute, and it took place in Shenzhen, Jilin province in China. And yes, this is straight out of Homeward Bound. 7 dogs stolen from their owners have gone viral after escaping an illegal transport truck and making their way home. They were taken, but they never stopped finding their way back. Yeah. $100 million, you'll make a fortune. I thought that was just a feel-good story that I wanted to do because it was fun. We might talk about it on the Living Joke on Wednesday too, but yeah, it was fun. And oh yeah, why did I say this? Oh, this is interesting. I might save the Epstein story with Michael Wolff until next week because my mouth is dry. I'm a little tired. So we might just end on the energy crisis because what's this tab? Oh, the antitrust division getting gutted. That's important. We can do it next week. I'll save those for next week. We're gonna stop on this little carousel on Instagram. So we've gone through Iran, we've gone through the plan and Trump and all this type of thing. This is an interesting sort of thing of what I think you need to be prepared for. Absolutely morbid black comedy that the U.S. government is removing sanctions on Russian and Iranian oil in 2026, not as part of any celebrated peace deal or diplomatic normalization, but as a last-ditch effort to soften the blow of a historic energy crisis caused by a U.S. war. IEA urges work-from-home measures as a way to mitigate oil price pressure on consumers. The next lockdown will occur because nobody can afford fuel. No need for another pandemic. You just make commuting impossible. Airlines dropped contingency plans over jet fuel shortage fears. Aviation executives said they were struggling to get assurances about the availability of fuel beyond the next month as war in the Middle East threatened supplies and drove up prices. There's demand. The International Energy Agency calls for demand cuts amid largest supply shock. IEA calls on governments worldwide to urgently reduce oil demand as escalating conflict in West Asia and the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz triggered the largest supply shock in modern history. U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran in late February have pushed oil prices above $100 per barrel, and analysts warn they could climb as high as $200 if disruptions persist. The strait carries 20% of the world's oil flows, and its closure strains markets despite the release of 400 million barrels from emergency reserves. The IEA urges immediate demand-cutting measures including remote work, reduced speed limits, increased use of public transport, and limits on car usage in major cities. The agency also recommends cutting air travel, particularly business flights, which could reduce jet fuel demand by up to 15%. Several countries have already implemented similar policies, echoing strategies from the 2022-2023 energy crisis as governments ease pressure on fuel consumption and prices. And it goes along in terms of refineries. All oil, gas wells, refineries, petrochemical plants, ports, and other critical energy infrastructure across West Asia and the Caucasus, as well as all takers will soon be destroyed. That's not true. Based upon a ground invasion, that is unlikely, but yes, that could definitely happen if this keeps going. I did love this one. Trump is doing more to destroy the fossil fuel industry and smash the sources of wealth that fuel inequality than the wildest socialist eco-terrorist could ever dream of. Oh yes, this goes into the hydrogen and everything. Long story short is there's an energy crisis that's starting. Plan accordingly, plan appropriately. If gas is still cheap where you are, now might be a time to fill your tank. Lay in food, this type of thing. And maybe don't plan on traveling because we might not be able to for very much longer. Now, here's one of the nice things about living in the United States. We are oil independent. We are a net exporter of oil, have been since 2013. The shock will not be as bad here, but as it propagates itself around the rest of the world, it could get very difficult. And we still have the fertilizer problem and the helium problem and all the other things that I mentioned. So, it's the top of the hour. I'm tired, mouth tired, throat dry. I'm going to sign off. My name is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal Newshour. Thank you so much for watching. Please find me online, cameronjournal.substack.com or cameronjournal.com, at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, at Cameron Journal on TikTok and Blue Sky. I thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you Wednesday for the Living Joke. Connor will be here. We're going to talk about some fun stuff with gaming and all this sort of thing. I just got back into Sea Skylines, and I'm going to talk about it. And then I'll see you next Monday for the Cameron Journal Newshour. The newsletter comes out Saturday. Go sign up now and get it delivered directly to your inbox. All right. Talk soon, everyone. Good night. Bye-bye.